Hello, I am Professor Soneri from the Department of Health and Human Performance at Samyog University. In recent years, risk and crisis communication has become very important in the field of public health management due to the outbreak of various infectious diseases, such as SARS, swine flu, MERS, and COVID-19. From that perspective, today's lecture will focus on risk communication, which is an important aspect in handling crisis situations caused by a pandemic. What comes to your mind when you hear the word risk? Usually the word risk can be translated as danger. However, many people think of hazard is the same thing as risk. The truth is the two are not the same concept. The concept hazard is usually translated as harm. It refers to substance, object, etc. that can cause serious damage. In the past, danger, risk, was defined as the chance of negative effect or damage due to the exposure to harmful factors. Usually, it is a degree of danger or risk that is determined by experts. So in the past, many government institutions and agencies used to perform risk management activities based on hazard, the likelihood of damage, exposure, evaluation, etc. However, the general public does not accept or perceive the risks as the expert tells them. Instead, they tend to understand and perceive the risks according to the social and cultural context surrounding themselves. So, Sandman defines danger as a combination of hazard which is based on science and outrage, where psychological factors come into effect. Outrage is usually translated as rage or anger. However, to be more precise, the term outrage can be understood as a series of emotive responses, or a series of emotional trigger responses. So, some scholars tend to translate the term outrage as emotional trigger response, but I'm just going to choose the easy way and translate it as rage. The public's perception towards the danger of rage or emotive response can be bigger when the hazard is less well known, the result is serious and the amount of exposure is larger, plus when the public feels that they have less control over the issue. So it can be said that how the public perceives such hazard is much more important than the hazard itself. For example, in the early days of the COVID-19 outbreak, since there was no vaccine or cure and no one had any kind of knowledge about the mystery disease, the general public perceived the hazard and risk of the disease much more seriously than what experts said. The public perception of risk is determined by different psychological factors, rather than by the opinion of experts. The reason why we need risk communication is simple. The risk perceived by the public and the risk perceived by the experts are different, and risk communication is a process that can be used to reduce this gap. Now let's take a look at how scholars define the term risk. Many scholars define the risk communication as a continuous process of exchanging meaningful information between the stakeholders to address the risk situation and confirm their perception towards a specific risk situation. In modern society, risk communication is defined as the act of expanding the forum of public opinion by promoting the participation of the public, sharing new information, and forming a meaningful relationship regarding the risk situation. Such definition of risk communication led to a change in communication by emphasizing the importance of the general public's perception on risk, rather than only focusing on the delivery of information and persuasion based on the opinions of experts. Recently, the term risk communication or crisis communication often appear in the media. You can think of both as the same thing. In a bigger sense, both terms all belong to the category risk communication, which can be translated as crisis conversation. In this case, the term crisis conversation emphasizes the responsive aspect of communication. And crisis communication can be defined as an organization or institution-centered term that focuses on the actual activities that are carried out in the real world. Earlier I said that the reason why we need risk communication is because there is a huge gap between the general public and experts regarding how they perceive the current risk, and risk communication can be a way to narrow this gap. If this gap continues to grow bigger, the fear of ordinary people like us may also grow bigger to a degree where we cannot control them, which will likely lead to an infodemic. I believe that many of you have heard a lot about the infodemic phenomenon through the media. Infodemics is a phenomenon in which fake and inaccurate information spreads like an epidemic through the media, causing a huge confusion among the public. In other words, infodemics can be referred to the spread of unnecessary risk awareness. If such infodemics develop into a major phenomenon, the level of fear among the public will also grow significantly, which will lead to a lot of fake news and misinformation. If this trend continues, it will result in a dramatic increase in social costs, and a lot of negative effects will occur in the process. Therefore, we must find drastic measures to reduce them. Now, let's talk about the second topic of today's lecture: understanding infodemics and the social spread of risk. I've just explained the concept of infodemics. For those who are curious, the term infodemics is a combination of information and pandemic. As the term itself suggests, it refers to a psychosocial infection caused by an information virus. You can think of it as a kind of tsunami of information. Infodemics can be understood as a psychosocial phenomenon caused by the excessive influx of dangerous information into the society. Regarding the quality of information, infodemics are caused by inaccurate, uncertain information, which brings a serious unbalance to our recognition of risk and our ability to respond to various situations. Infodemic refers to the spread of negative emotions such as anxiety, fear, avoidance, and disgust, rather than strengthening our ability to overcome crisis situations through the delivery of accurate facts. So some call this the ripple effects, and it is regarded as a pathological public opinion phenomenon. If this situation worsens, it spreads throughout the entire society, leading to a higher level of social anxiety and fear. That is why we can call infodemics as a typical case of failed communication. There are some theories about infodemics. For example, some scholars suggest that infodemics occur when a series of media reports occur repeatedly, leading to an excessive amount of information on a subject that we do not know well about. The medium of delivering infodemics is the media. So if the media releases a lot of information at once or continuously, the level of confusion and chaos in a society will inevitably increase. Moreover, in recent days, not only social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube create various information in huge amounts, but also traditional media such as TV provide us with excessive amounts of information, amplifying the psychological anxiety and fear of many people. However, unlike actual diseases which can be medically or physically controlled, the information viruses can be spread across the entire society through various media channels in a surprisingly short amount of time, making it virtually impossible for us to control them. So, if these viruses suddenly spill out into our society at once, the system of our society could end up falling into pieces. It is true that the media can play a positive role in raising the public's awareness towards various risks and help them understand the danger of information viruses. However, the media can also create a sense of psychosocial anxiety and fear by producing and disseminating uncertain, inaccurate information in the masses. The psychological mechanism that influences people's perception of risk may, among many other things, be closely related to the amount of news, reports, and media coverage about risk information. According to the statistics, more than 3.5 million COVID-19 related articles were posted on Naver from January 20, which was the date when the first COVID-19 was confirmed in Korea, to July 20. Next, let's talk about real cases related to COVID-19 infodemics. If you look at the first part, you can see a conspiracy theory that you must have heard about before. You know, those theories saying that the chemical and biological warfare between the US and China has led to the outbreak of COVID-19. COVID-19 is an artificially created virus. Those kind of theories, these can all be considered as a prime example of fake news. Second case, there was this news saying that a church, which I believe was the River of Grace Church, the members of the church were spraying salt water inside their mouth for oral disinfection and prevent COVID-19. And in the early stages of the COVID-19 outbreak, I remember there was a lot of controversy surrounding the effects of masks. There was even some fake news arguing that masks have absolutely no effect in preventing the coronavirus. And you can't forget one of the most well-known infodemics that caused a lot of confusion across the entire nation, which was the news saying that young people are immune to COVID-19. Next, I'm going to talk about a theory related to infodemics. First, the agenda-building theory. According to this theory, when the media starts to focus on a certain situation or a specific issue, they only focus on that issue situation alone. This way, an agenda is formed. The key of this theory is that if the media begins to focus on a certain issue, more coverage, the public starts to recognize it as a very important issue, regardless of the actual importance or significance of the situation. This is the agenda-setting theory. There is a theory which suggests that if the media deals with a lot of fake news, the danger spreads to the people throughout the country. This theory is called the social diffusion theory, risk. The key of the social diffusion theory is that the public's perception and behavior towards a specific news can be strengthened and spread from a psychological, social, and cultural perspective. We usually stigmatize someone when a specific risk is directly associated with me or my values, when he, she is against my or my social group's position towards a certain issue, when he, she is unique and hard to understand, and when we are seriously biased. This is called the process of stigmatization. The problem is that when stigmatization occurs, it becomes more likely that this risk will spread even faster to more people. Next, let's talk about the issue wearing a mask, which is one of the prime examples of risk communication. Since there are no vaccine or cure to COVID-19, non-pharmaceutical interventions are very important. Non-pharmaceutical interventions include washing our hands, wearing masks, not going outside, or keeping a social distance with others. Among them, let's talk a bit more about wearing masks. When we turn on the TV, we can see multiple reports about other countries, especially European countries and the US, where people refuse to wear masks and even start a protest saying that they have the right to not wear a mask. But from our point of view, this entire series of events may seem very strange. However, if we learn more about the European and American culture, you'll be able to realize that this is not so strange from their perspective. In Europe and the US, the general public share a very negative image about wearing masks. This is because many robbers and thieves have worn masks. So while many of us might think, what's so hard about wearing a mask? Why are they making such a fuss about it? I say that we should try to understand their culture, or we won't be able to understand the reasoning behind their actions. But on the other hand, as we all know, wearing a mask is not a difficult thing to do in Asia. This is because we are used to wearing masks because of flus and other types of infectious diseases. We don't find it strange when we see someone wearing a mask on a cold winter day. Another important reason why we don't have any resistance to wearing masks is because of the fine particulate matter that comes from China. Many Koreans are used to wearing face masks to protect ourselves from fine particulate matter and fine dust, which resulted in a very low level of resistance to face masks. However, in the past, many Koreans also shared a certain level of resistance to face masks. That's why some of the older generation refused to wear face masks during the early days of the COVID-19 outbreak. Let's talk about Japan. About a decade ago, face masks were considered as a new type of fashion in the mainstream Japanese culture. You know, it's more comfortable when you wear a mask, right? You don't have to put on makeup, you don't have to show your face. It has a lot of advantages, which was the reason why masks were popular among many Japanese people. So many Japanese began to wear masks when they didn't want to wash their face or had to go outside for a short time, which led to a culture where masks were considered as a common thing and even a fashion item. After a few years, this mask culture was imported to Korea, and many celebrities started wearing masks in front of the public and even on TV. That's why many people didn't feel much resistance when the government recommended them to wear masks. The moral of this case is simple. When you're trying to make someone do something or communicate with them, you must consider the cultural background of the people. In the early days of the COVID-19 outbreak, there was a lot of controversy regarding the use of masks. The first controversy was about the rating of masks. At the early days of COVID-19, the recommendations and orders regarding what type of mask we should wear from different government institutions such as the Ministry of the Interior and Safety, Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the MFDS were all different and the orders even changed over time. But this confusion was related to the problem of mask supply. Back then, the demand for masks were skyrocketing, but the supply wasn't catching up with the explosive demand, which led to various problems. However, the supply issue was solved thanks to the introduction of a public mask 5-day rotation system, which prevented the hoarding of masks and reduced the uncertainty surrounding the issue. Finally, let's talk about the basic principles of risk communication. So many stakeholders exist in risk communication. Just looking at the mask case that we've just looked at, the Ministry of Food and Drug Safety is in charge of the supply of masks, and the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency is in charge of disease-related issues. In addition, the people are also involved. Not to mention that the local community also plays an important role. So if you wish to be good at risk communication, you must learn how to understand the perspectives of different stakeholders that are involved in the issue. And rather than simply deliver information unilaterally, it is important to pursue a bilateral type of communication, where we try our best to understand what the people think. In short, when it comes to risk communication, we must consider various factors, such as participation of residents, stakeholders, etc. Therefore, risk communication is more close to a comprehensive art form rather than a subject of academic observation. And as you can see in the next slide, the scope of risk communication contains important information. Facts. You must understand that it is important to share facts. And if we know that something is the wrong thing to do, it means that we must reduce the wrong act. Behavioral action and practice to reduce the risk, this is the second scope of risk communication. The third thing that we must consider is simple. We must identify the stakeholders. Fourth, it's not just about how people perceive it or what the hazard is. It is more about how the people perceive the hazard. This is the important part, and we must understand how people view different hazards. In conclusion, the people's perception of risk depends on how the media responds to a specific issue. So, I think we must take a look at media response too. Lastly, if we want to make the people wear masks, it's important to start a campaign that encourages their action. But recently, if someone doesn't wear masks, they get penalized by legal or administrative measures. So, creating a guideline that considers these kinds of factors is also an important part and area of risk communication. And there are 4 important principles for risk communication. So, what interferes risk communication? The first thing is the lack of communication. That's why during the early days of COVID-19, there were a lot of fake news going around. Hence, the term Infodemics became popular. This happened because we didn't know that COVID-19 was back then. The people did not have enough knowledge about the disease, and we weren't able to properly understand what the media and experts were saying about the virus. So it can be said that providing correct information is a shortcut to preventing infodemics. Second, as I said earlier, I've defined the term risk as the combination of hazard and outrage. If you don't understand how the people emotionally react and respond to the situation, you won't be able to have an effective communication. So it is important to understand the feelings and emotions of the people. In order to do that, it is important to make sure that the people don't get the idea that the government is hiding something from them. To do this, the government must always remain transparent regardless of the situation. And finally, even if the government says something extremely important, many people won't follow the guidelines and directions provided by the government if they don't trust the government. So building a relationship full of trust is critical to establish a quality risk communication. Therefore, when we talk about the principles of risk communication, these 4 principles are considered the basics. The first principle is accuracy. This is about providing correct information. The second principle is speed, which is about providing information quickly. The third principle is transparency. And the last principle is reliability. These are the 4 basic principles of communication. Today's lecture was about understanding the concept of risk, mass cases related to infodemics, and the basic principles of risk communication. Most importantly, the key to preventing infodemics is accurate information. I believe that accurate information can help us overcome and defeat infodemics. In conclusion, I think that it is very important to provide accurate information to the right people, target, at the right time when they really need that information. That's it for today's lecture. Thank you all.